Out here, they tell you the wasteland is quiet, that it's just dust and distant thunder, and the occasional idiot firing a rifle at the sun. That's a lie. The wasteland is loud if you know what to listen for. A Geiger tick under your tongue, a loose sign creaking like a bone, boots on rubble that don't sound like your boots. And then, the sound that makes every other sound stop. The Deathclaw's roar. I've watched hardened raiders freeze mid-laugh. I've watched NCR troopers forget their own names. I've watched Brotherhood Knights, steel-plated and sermon-fed, back up like the world just remembered it can still hurt them. Because the Deathclaw isn't just an animal. It's a receipt. A bill from the old world that never got paid. And if you want to understand why it's still collecting interest out there, you have to go back to before the bombs, before the ash, before we learned to barter with bullets. You have to go back to the moment America tried to manufacture fear. The official stories call the Sino-American War a conflict of resources. Oil, territory, pride. But wars always become something simpler. A math problem where the only numbers that matter are how many bodies you can afford to lose. By 2066, the math was ugly. By the mid-2000s, it was obscene. So the Pentagon did what desperate men do. They asked a question no sane person asks out loud. What if the infantry wasn't human? Not robots. Too expensive, too fragile, too many moving parts. They wanted something cheap, hardy, something that could crawl through a collapsed subway and still fight. Something that could sprint through a burning corridor and not stop to scream. They wanted a living weapon, a biological shock trooper. And somewhere in a classified facility, under fluorescent lights that never forgave anyone, they started stitching animals together like a drunken god. They spliced DNA, various stocks, but the whispers always circle back to the horned Jackson's chameleon. Horns, hide, camouflage instincts, a body built to survive and vanish. Then they did the thing that turned Predator into Nightmare. They introduced forced evolutionary virus. FEV doesn't just mutate, it rewrites. It takes nature's slow patience and replaces it with violence on fast forward. And out of that chemical arrogance came a creature that stood upright, so it could see over cover, so it could bring its claws down like executioner blades. They named it with all the poetry the military can manage. Deathclaw. Subtle. Here's the part people get wrong. They think Deathclaws are radiation monsters, a byproduct of the bombs, like Brahmin with 2 heads and roaches the size of toddlers. Number. Deathclaws are not an accident. They are policy. They are a program, a budget line item, a decision made in a clean room by people who thought consequences were something that happened to other countries. They were built for close combat support, the dirty fighting, trenches, bunkers, indoor clearing where even power armor struggled to move without getting tangled or shot in the joints. Imagine it, a T-45 unit stomping forward, loud as a collapsing building, and beside it, something silent and fast. Something that leaps over rubble and removes a human being from existence in one swipe. That was the dream. Less American blood, more American victory. But biology doesn't salute. It doesn't chant the anthem. And it sure as hell doesn't care about chain of command. The Deathclaw succeeded. Too well. Muscle like coiled rebar. Hide thick enough to laugh at small arms. A skull built to ram through fences that were never meant to hold it. Speed that makes your aim feel like an insult to physics. And intelligence. Not read a book intelligence, but the kind that matters in a fight. Pattern recognition, ambush logic, pack coordination, the brutal mathematics of hunting something that can shoot back. So the containment logs started filling with the kind of language engineers hate. Unpredictable, escalating aggression, testing perimeter. That's the moment every handler realizes the truth. They didn't build a soldier. They build a predator that regards humans the way humans regard deer. Then the Great War came. One day the lights are on, the next day the world is a funeral pyre. People like to imagine the bombs as an instant end, but the end was messy. Facilities burned, doors jammed, power failed. Automated systems died in their own confusion, and cages opened. Maybe some Deathclaws ran because the alarms hurt their ears. Maybe some ran because fire teaches everything the same lesson. Move. Maybe some ran because the world outside finally smelled like freedom. Whatever the reason, they ran. And 2 centuries later, we're still paying for that sprint. By 2016, in Southern California, Deathclaws had become folklore. People spoke about them like ghosts, a rumor told around fires to keep kids close. Just another stupid story, they'd say. A huge fanged monster, a vampire, whatever. That's how it starts. Because it's easier to laugh than to accept there's something out there you cannot bargain with. Then, caravans vanish, and the laughter gets quieter. A mother Deathclaw sets up near the gunrunner's territory, and suddenly trade routes bend like spines. People stop traveling. Commerce dies. And when commerce dies, settlements follow. One nest can starve a town without ever laying a claw on its walls. That's how apex predators reshape human maps. Fallout taught us another truth. Deathclaws aren't solitary nightmares. They're community nightmares. They guard eggs. They defend territory. They operate with hierarchy. Alpha, mother, young. When you see one, you're already late to the meeting, because you're standing in their agenda, not yours. Then came the Master. If the Pentagon was arrogance in a lab coat, the Master was arrogance wrapped in religion. He found Deathclaws, lab-born survivors, and exposed them to Fev again, refining physiology like a sculptor who only knows one tool: pain. The result? Bigger bodies, more brutality. A legend that grew teeth enough to chew through power-armored confidence. And here's the cruel twist. He wasn't even trying to tame them. No records of tactical deployment. No disciplined packs used in his campaigns. So why do it? Because some minds treat life as material. Because curiosity is a knife when empathy is dead. Because the Master wanted to understand evolution. And the Deathclaw was a perfect specimen for the worst kind of study. What happens if I make the nightmare stronger? By Fallout 2, the Enclave took the old American dream and did what it always does. They tried to own it again. They experimented to restore the original design as a weapon of war. In plain words, they wanted smarter Deathclaws. Obedient Deathclaws. Deathclaws with enough brains to follow orders and enough claws to erase whole squads. And for a moment, they got what they wanted. Intelligent Deathclaws. Talking. Organizing. Building a small society. A pack that could communicate like people. That should have changed everything. It proved the monster wasn't just rage. It proved it could be reason. But reason is inconvenient to tyrants. So when those Deathclaws rebelled, when they refused to be property, the Enclave sent executioners. Frank Horrigan, extermination squads, a massacre dressed up as security. Only a couple survived. And if you've ever wondered why the wasteland feels like it's haunted by possibilities that never lived long enough, that's one of them. A future where the apex predator might have chosen peace, shot in the back by the same government that made it. By 2027, the Enclave tried again. Different leash. Not breeding intelligence, technology, control collars, domestication units. Because it's always easier to bolt a device onto something than to admit you shouldn't have made it in the first place. They deployed Deathclaws like shock troops, and the moment the collars failed, the beasts did what beasts do. They attacked the nearest threat. Sometimes that threat was the Enclave handler holding the remote. That's the thing about enslaving predators. You don't create loyalty. You create a countdown. Then the Mojave showed us something colder. What Deathclaws look like when they're not an experiment in progress, but a species living its own ecology. Quarry Junction, a mining site turned into a graveyard. An alpha male and a mother Deathclaw holding court over a nest like royalty made of teeth. People said, kill the alpha and the pack breaks. Others said, kill the mother and it ends. Truth is nastier. As long as one survives, the cycle continues. Another mate, another clutch of eggs, another generation raised on the lesson that humans are fragile. The NCR rerouted trade, not because they couldn't fight, but because fighting meant spending lives they'd rather spend elsewhere. And the Deathclaws didn't even have to win a war. They just had to exist. The Commonwealth, 2287. Fallout 4 made sure nobody forgot the first time you see one up close. A Deathclaw climbing out of the ground like the earth itself is angry. A test of courage delivered 5 minutes into your new life. And then, a small moment that feels like a knife because it's so human. Returning an egg. A mother that doesn't attack if you bring her child back. People hear that and think it makes Deathclaws less scary. No, it makes them worse. Because it reminds you that beneath the horror is a living thing with instincts we recognize. Protect the young, punish the thief, defend the nest. That's not mindless evil. That's nature, weaponized by science. And Appalachia, 2102, only 25 years after the bombs, proved something that should have terrified us even more. Deathclaws weren't a single lab's mistake. They were a network. Multiple sites, multiple projects, multiple scientists with the same bright idea and the same dead soul. So by the time the ash settled, the monster wasn't just loose, it was distributed. You can't kill a rumor when the rumor has nests. Now, the new canon, live action, shows something the old debates circled for decades. Alaska, a Deathclaw in the snow. A pre-war battlefield where a creature turns soldiers into red mist in seconds. And it spares an American. That's the detail that sticks in your throat, because it suggests the unthinkable, that someone tried to give it target logic. Friend or foe. A monster trained to recognize a uniform. Or it suggests the other possibility, that in the chaos, it simply chose the less immediate threat. Either way, the horror lands the same. The US didn't just build the Deathclaw, they were willing to use it. And if you ever wondered what kind of country can look at a living weapon and call it cost-effective, look around at the wasteland. We're standing in the answer. Then the show drags that answer into a place we all thought was safe behind nostalgia. New Vegas. A city of neon bones. A legend turned into rubble. And Deathclaws walking the strip like they inherited it. People argue about endings. NCR, House, Independence. But the Deathclaw ending is the most Fallout ending of all. No matter who wins today, the old world sins can still stroll in tomorrow and claim the whole table. So here's the truth I cataloged for Face Corp. The truth I've learned the hard way with friends who didn't make it back to camp. Deathclaws are not just the wasteland's apex predator. They are the wasteland's judgment. Every time a Deathclaw tears through a patrol, it's the old world reaching out through time to remind you it never stopped being cruel. We made a soldier that didn't need a paycheck, a weapon that didn't need propaganda, a hunter that didn't need a reason. And now it hunts because that's what it was engineered to do. The only part they got wrong was thinking it would ever stop at the enemy. Because once you create fear, fear doesn't stay in the box labeled foreign. It leaks, it spreads, it learns your smell. So if you're walking at dusk and the wind goes still, if the birds shut up, if your footsteps suddenly feel loud enough to offend the sky, don't tell yourself it's nothing. Don't call it a rumor. Because the Deathclaw doesn't come from the end of the world. It comes from the world before the end. The one that thought it could engineer terror and still sleep at night. And when you hear the roar, remember, that sound is not the wasteland speaking. That sound is America echoing.
Archive node reconnecting. Face Corp terminal online.
Well, you made it to the end, Wastelander. And I want to thank you for walking this dusty road with me. These stories, they live because you keep listening, because you care, because the wasteland still has folks like you out there. If you've got a topic you want me to dig into next, a vault, a faction, a legend, a cover-up, send it my way. Face Corp is always monitoring incoming requests. And hey, if you enjoyed this archive entry, press that like button. It keeps the terminal lights on. And if you want more stories from the ruins, go on and subscribe. Your support helps Face Corp recover and preserve every last fragment of our shattered world.
Loading next recommended archive file. File located. Displaying now.
It's right there on your screen. Go on. Open it. I'll meet you inside.